Good afternoon. I'm going to make a start now, so thank you very much for joining. My name is Natalie Merrett, and I'm the Head of Knowledge Dissemination in the Schools Division at Freud. I'd like to warmly welcome you to our seminar this afternoon, which will focus on anxiety and how education professionals can talk about it and support young people experiencing it in schools and colleges. It's always incredible to see how many of you register for these events that we hold and turn up, despite having such important and demanding roles. So thank you so much to all of you who have joined us this afternoon on the webinar. This afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by two very experienced speakers who will explore the topic of anxiety in schools and colleges and the vital role that schools and colleges play in relation to prevention, by both increasing knowledge and understanding, and also by giving young people tools and practical strategies to manage their mental well-being. We hope that you find it useful today and that you come away with some ideas or tools that you might be able to take away and use in your settings. So for a bit of context to today's topic, last year, the Department for Education reported that anxiousness in primary and secondary school age children had increased since the pandemic years of 2020 to 2021. And in a separate piece of research, 82% of teachers reported seeing anxious pupils and the worsening of existing mental health problems since the previous year. We also had similar findings through our work with education professionals. So in a recent meeting with Anna Freud's education panel, and this is a panel that we work with that's made up of senior leaders from across the UK, nearly all of the attendees reported anxiety to be the most pressing concern for them in their education setting. Also, in a recent survey which we conducted with over 1,000 education professionals from all phases, highlighted that they would like more support on anxiety within their setting. We know that having strong coping skills to manage anxious feelings can help to ensure that they don't lead to mental ill health in the long term. So then, based on these findings, and to coincide with Mental Health Awareness Week, which was last week, and obviously the theme was anxiety, we decided to launch a very exciting new animation and accompanying teacher toolkit, which is called Let's Talk About Anxiety. This toolkit is aimed at students in the early years of secondary school, and it offers top tips on how to manage feelings of anxiety when they arise. It also helps to explain that anxiety is a normal emotion. The resource was co-created with young people and education professionals, and we used their voices and experiences throughout the development process. This co-creation helped us to gain an understanding of the most prevalent causes and types of anxiety amongst young people in education settings, as well as the impacts of that anxiety. So before we get into the presentations this afternoon, I'm very excited to be able to share the animation with you all now. And just before we get started and I play it for you, I just also wanted to note that if you wanted more information about the animation and toolkit, or if you'd like to download a copy for use in your setting, please visit the page that's going to be linked in the chat. So without further ado, we are going to play the animation for you, and then we'll kick off and introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Everyone gets anxious from time to time. It's completely normal, and it can feel slightly different for everyone.
Anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as fear or worry. It's one of the body's natural responses to stress. It can feel like a fluttery, panicky sensation.
You might feel your heart racing, or perhaps you'll feel a bit hot and sweaty. This feeling will vary from person to person.
It's normal to feel anxious sometimes. You might feel nervous before an exam, or a big change like moving into a new school year, or you might be worried about your friendships.
Sometimes we might not be sure why we feel anxious. This can be normal too. Most of the time, feelings of anxiety will pass naturally and you will start to feel okay again. But sometimes we might need to take extra care to look after ourselves and manage anxious feelings.
Let's think of some of the times that you might feel anxious and look at some tips that might help you.
Balancing school and home life can be really hard. This can be something that makes you feel anxious sometimes.
As well as your schoolwork, you might have extra responsibilities at home, like looking after family members or helping around the house.
Perhaps you're getting a lot of homework, or you need to revise for a test.
And it feels like there isn't enough time to fit everything in.
If you're feeling overwhelmed, it can really help for you to talk to someone. Talking to someone can help you to manage better, feel less alone and more supported.
You can talk to whoever you feel most comfortable with, a family member, a friend, or a trusted adult.
Using your phone can be a great way of keeping in touch with your friends and family, but sometimes if you're online too much, it can make you feel anxious. You might keep comparing yourself to other people or feel like everyone is having an exciting life except you, or start worrying a lot about what other people think of you.
It can be helpful to take breaks from your phone. You can put it somewhere safe and out of sight, like a drawer.
You can spend your time doing other things that you enjoy, like going outside for a walk,
Watching films.
Or spending time with friends or family.
At night, rather than scrolling in bed, try to stop looking at your phone at least half an hour before you go to sleep. Instead, try listening to relaxing music or reading a book, whatever helps you to relax.
If you're still having trouble sleeping, focus on your breathing. Take long, deep breaths and count to 5. This can help you to relax. Sometimes things that happen in everyday life can feel overwhelming. You might feel worried about an exam,
A big game, or a presentation,
Moving up to a new school year and meeting lots of new people.
or even speaking to your friends and people you already know.
You might also feel anxious about the things going on in the world that you hear about on the news or see going on around you.
One way to help is to focus on what you can control and to look after yourself.
From keeping physically active, going outside and eating well, to connecting with others and doing things you enjoy.
And trying new things as well.
Everyone's self-care will look different. Doing things that you enjoy can help to calm your mind. Remember, feeling anxious from time to time is completely normal. Using our tips can help manage that. If the feelings of anxiety do not pass, begin to get worse and start taking control of your day-to-day life, it might be worth asking for specialist advice.
However, most of the time, these feelings are normal.
Everyone is different.
Not all these tips will work out for everyone.
Try and find out what works for you.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So yeah, we hope you've enjoyed the animation, and I really hope that you'll be able to utilise it and the accompanying materials in your own time. If you do use it, please send us feedback. We're always really keen to ensure that our materials are useful and also make improvements where necessary. It's really exciting to have Deb's Bligh on the call this afternoon, as her students were actually involved in the creation of this animation. So yeah, very, very exciting for us. And I can see some comments about the link to the toolkit, so we'll put that in the chat for you as well, so that you can access that. Thank you. So just a couple of practical things before I hand over to our first speaker. So first of all, we will share the slides and a recording of the seminar with you by email. Please note this could take up to 10 days. And we'll also be ending this afternoon session with a Q&A with our speakers. So if you have any questions that you'd like answered, please type them into the Q&A function below, and we'll try our best to answer as many of them as possible. And then finally, if you are tweeting, please use @AFNCCF. That's our handle. And please tag us and use the Schools in Mind hashtag. So now I am very, very delighted to introduce you to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Cyra Neave, who is a colleague that I work very closely with in the schools division. Cyra has worked as a clinical psychologist in the NHS for over 10 years, specialising in work with children and adolescents. Her experience has provided her with the opportunity to work in a wide range of settings, including outpatient, inpatient, and community settings. She's worked with individuals, families, and groups, as well as providing supervision, consultation, and training. Cyra specialises in working in schools and has spent many years working across both primary and secondary schools in London, providing them with a range of therapeutic support, consultation, and training. Cyra is currently working as the senior clinician within the school's outreach team at Anna Freud. Over to you, Cyra.
Thanks, Natalie.
No problem, thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So thanks. Yeah, I'm here to talk with you a little bit about anxiety. So obviously anxiety, a massive topic, and I have, a limited time. So I'm just going to pull out some key ideas for you today, and then hopefully we can maybe expand on them a little bit, like Natalie mentioned at the end in the Q&A. This is where technology fails me. It's not letting me.
Are your slides clicking through? No.
Wait, I'm just going to reshare, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm not going to go through the statistics because I think Natalie really helpfully mentioned kind of a few really important things. But I guess there is no doubt that you're all aware of the rise in mental health difficulties in children and young people. And really what we have noticed, as Natalie mentioned, is the increase in, I guess, referrals to mental health services for children with presenting with anxiety. And we're hearing teachers telling us that they're seeing a lot of children presenting with anxiety in schools. So I'm really happy to be talking to you about this topic today. There's no doubt that the impact of COVID, lockdown, being one of the major factors amongst many, really. So what is anxiety? It's an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, physical changes. When faced with potentially harmful or worrying triggers, feelings of anxiety are not only normal, but really they're necessary for survival. Our body responds to danger in a way that keeps us safe. So what happens in the face of something stressful or anxiety provoking, our body will have a rush of kind of two key hormones. So adrenaline, which ensures that the heart is pumping the blood around the body, and really preparing our body to get ready to run away from danger or to face danger. And equally, a hormone called cortisol is released, which is the stress hormone. But really all of these physiological responses in the body are putting us in a state of high alert, which, I have no doubt you've heard of the fight or flight response. So, that is what anxiety is for, really. This slide is just to really highlight how normal, anxiety is and that it's developmentally very appropriate. So, the stages that the young baby goes through when they are, for example, showing separation anxiety or stranger anxiety, it's all really necessary and important for their development. Or when the child reaches an age and starts talking about being scared of the dark or scared of death. All of these, again, completely developmentally appropriate. So nothing to worry about, really, and children will go through all of these stages. I felt like it was important to focus on what anxiety might look like in the classroom, because I feel like anxiety can look quite different for different children. And sometimes what we see, we wouldn't necessarily link with anxiety. So we do see some children who are incredibly fidgety, incredibly struggling with attention, concentration, focus, almost looking quite, I don't know, ADHD in their presentation, but actually underlying that can be anxiety. So I think it's really important to explore this with young people and to really see what's going on for them, because it could be that underlying what they're showing you on the surface is actually anxiety. You might see the more classic presentations, of course, as well, where they're anxious about speaking in class, or, anxious about doing a presentation in front of the class, things like that. They may seek a lot of reassurance from you. Those are the more typical kind of anxiety presentations. But I did want to flag maybe the less known ones, the focus, the attention, concentration, the irritability, the fidgeting, those kind of ones as well. I thought it was helpful to kind of break down. I mean, this shows the kind of breadth of what it might look like. So the psychological symptoms, the physical symptoms, and then the behavioral ones. Again, really quite varied. Again, the more familiar ones might be, or the tummy ache, the headache, the catastrophic thinking, the seeking reassurance, those kind of things. But actually, it's can be quite varied in how the young person presents. So again, kind of that need to explore that and be curious about a young person and how they're presenting, and trying to see if perhaps anxiety is a factor for them. So, what I've been talking about, I hope, and how I hope it's coming across, is that anxiety is very normal. We all experience it. And I think the animation does that really nicely. It's there for survival. It's adaptive. It keeps us safe. A perfect example of anxiety keeping us safe was during the pandemic. We were anxious, therefore we were more inclined to wash our hands more frequently. We kept our distance. Perhaps we wore masks. So, it does have a purpose. However, when anxiety can become more of a concern is when it is being triggered when there's no threat, there's no danger, when it's occurring frequently, if it feels really intense, when it's significantly distressing, when it stops you from doing fun things, or essentially is impacting on the child or young person's functioning day to day over a prolonged period of time. And when it feels unmanageable, then that's kind of verging on not so normal and maybe needs a bit of extra attention. So just to talk a little bit about the brain, a child who's in danger operates out of the what we call the primitive part of the brain. So this part of the brain is responsible for the child's survival system, so kind of what I was talking about earlier. But the brain develops from the bottom upwards. So the lower parts are responsible for functions dedicated to ensuring survival and responding to stress. And the upper parts of the brain are responsible for what we call executive functions. So the executive functions are kind of essential for day-to-day life. So I'll show you so these are the key kind of executive functions: working memory, emotion control, sustained attention, task initiation, planning, organization, all these really important things. However, when an individual is anxious, their primitive brain is activated and their executive functions are highly compromised. So a young person presenting with high levels of anxiety will therefore be really struggling with kind of all of this big list. And, you can see how important this list is really, and the impact that it would have on their life if it's at an extreme. The other thing to flag is kind of the three key things that keep anxiety going. So what we do know is obviously avoidance. So it's inevitable that if we find something stressful or anxiety provoking, we tend to avoid it. However, that can be incredibly unhelpful in that it actually increases our anxiety. And at an extreme end of the spectrum, that would lead to perhaps kind of emotionally based school avoidance or something like that. Reassurance is another factor that keeps anxiety going. So the young person will seek constant reassurance, and if we constantly reassure them, oh, don't worry, everything will be okay, actually in the long run, it doesn't really help them to manage their anxiety, because it's almost like a short-term fix of their anxiety going down when we reassure them. I'll go into that a bit later, a bit more. And then safety behaviors. So safety behaviors are behaviors that a young person has kind of learnt to do to manage their anxiety, but then they give all the credit to that behavior rather than actually, and they become quite reliant on that behavior rather than realizing that actually the anxiety will go down anyway. So for example, a young person who always feels like they need to be outside in the fresh air when they feel anxious, when actually the anxiety will go down even if they're not in the fresh air. Okay, so just to talk you through a few ideas of how we can help young people presenting with anxiety. So I think one of the things, again, to emphasize is normalizing their anxiety, and you know, in certain situations that it's really normal to feel anxious. And actually in some situations it's quite helpful. A little bit of anxiety, for example, ahead of an exam will lead to a release of adrenaline and actually can help them focus, but obviously too much becomes unhelpful. But helping a young person to identify their physical signs of anxiety and almost label it as anxiety, but also talking them through support options if needed. Staying calm but supportive and trying not to get too drawn in to their emotions. I think young people who present with anxiety tend to have an amazing ability to draw us in to their emotions, and also to make us feel like you know, we need to make things better for them. But helpful if you're able to stay supportive but also practical and modeling positive ways for managing anxiety. And then the third point is about reassurance, which I mentioned earlier. So instead of being quick to reassure a young person, which in the short term will reduce their anxiety, you know, if they say, oh, you know, I'm really worried about this, and rather than saying, oh, it's okay, you'll be okay, everything will be fine, which has the effect of reducing their anxiety in that moment, but then it'll go up again, trying to get them to explore it a little bit. So maybe flipping it round and asking them some questions like, you know, well, okay, so you're feeling anxious. How did you manage this last time you felt like this? Or what strengths have you shown before in this situation? Or if a friend came to you and asked for advice, what might you say to them? This just helps them to begin to learn to, I guess, problem solve for themselves. And in a sense, need less of that reassurance seeking from the teachers around them. And then praising and rewarding small and big successes. So, you know, noticing that young person who gets up in front of the class and knowing that they find that very difficult, making sure that we really kind of big them up and say, you know, I know that was really hard for you, you did amazingly, you know, just to kind of encourage them to then maybe take the next step as well. And it helps them to remain positive. And I have no doubt that you are all really good at that. So, yeah, really important to, I guess, validate and help to just listen and validate the young person's emotions, to resist the need for constantly reassuring, to you know, not kind of be too blaming or criticizing. And I guess the last one is about not overwhelming students. So it might be that we present them with some ideas, but maybe keeping things simple and not giving them too many kind of strategies to try or things to do, so that then they feel overwhelmed, or what we might call kind of cognitive overload, where they just feel like, oh, it's all too much, I'm not going to do anything. So maybe just breaking it down for them and helping them try one thing at a time, so that they can, again, kind of small steps towards success. So one of the techniques I'm sure you're all familiar with is grounding techniques. There are lots of different ones that you can choose. I just chose this particular one, which is around the senses, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is a 5-step exercise, and it can be helpful during periods of anxiety or panic by helping to ground the young person into the present moment when their mind is bouncing around between various anxious thoughts. So it's just kind of a technique when anxiety is feeling very overwhelming, when they're very much in their head, to just bring them back to the moment, to the present, and draw the attention away from the anxious thoughts, and then kind of take it from there. So that's one technique. Now, there are loads of different breathing techniques, which again, I'm sure you're familiar with. And each young person needs to find one perhaps that suits them. You know, the idea of breathing techniques is initially in one way a form of distraction. So again, similar to the grounding technique, to bring them away from their mind, which is swirling with all of these negative, anxious thoughts, and just bring them back to their breathing, bring them back to just slowing down and focusing on their breathing, and bring them back into the moment. But what we also know is if breathing techniques are regularly practiced and it becomes kind of almost part of a young person's self-care, we know that deep controlled breathing with kind of extended exhalation, which actually takes a lot of practice, can stimulate the vagus nerve, which causes a fall in heart rate, and it actually does overall induce feelings of calm and relaxation. But that's something that would need to be practiced over time. It's a real technique, to be honest, one that I have yet to master. But I wanted to talk about briefly about panic attacks as well, because I do think that we do see young people in school with panic attacks. A panic attack is a feeling of sudden and intense anxiety, of which you can see all of these symptoms that are listed in front of you. And then panic disorder is when you experience repeated panic attacks. And really a panic attack is when normal physical sensations associated with anxiety are experienced by the young person as dangerous. So they interpret the normal feelings of anxiety as really being dangerous to their body. So it's going to make me sick, it's going to make me pass out, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going crazy. So they don't really understand what's going on in their body, and they really panic about what's happening to them. And then it often leads to avoidance of certain situations where they think that they might have a panic attack. So then they get stuck in a bit of a spiral. So again, how to kind of intervene, staying calm, staying present, staying with the young person, offering words of encouragement, again, validating their experience, explaining to them that what they're experiencing is a panic attack. What I like to often say to young people is acknowledging how horrible, because they are horrible panic attacks, how horrible they feel. However, it can't hurt you in any way. A panic attack doesn't harm you. It will pass. In time, it will pass. And then maybe again, getting them to focus on their breathing, or you might want to use a grounding technique to bring them back into their room, into the moment, into the present, and to slow their heart rate down. You know, panic attacks tend to last, you know, between 5 minutes and 30 minutes, but it will pass in time. And then one of the last strategies I wanted to talk about was coping, what we call coping self-talk. So really coping self-talk is when we speak to us, when we learn to speak to ourselves in a kinder and more compassionate way. Now, this obviously wouldn't be a technique that you would use in the moment of extreme anxiety or panic. It would be something you would do with a young person when they were calm, and then a technique that they would then put into place when they were feeling anxious. So kind of developing some coping self-talk statements with the young person. So trying to get them to think about, okay, rather than I can't do this, can we say something a bit kinder to yourself? And they need to come up with it themselves, but these are examples that so I just need to try my best, or I find maths difficult, but I can ask for help and give it a go. So trying to just be a bit kinder in the way we speak to each other, a bit more positive. And it's really helpful for teachers to model this way of talking, of course, as well, so that young people get used to it, which again, I know you all do a lot of. And in time, coping self-talk's been shown to reduce stress, to improve self-esteem, to increase motivation, to inspire productivity, and to improve overall mental health. So it's a lovely strategy that I like using with young people. Okay, I've got a little case study just to talk you through as I come to the end of my presentation. I'm not going to go into the background or anything, but this was a 12-year-old girl referred to for help with panic attacks in school, referred to me. The panic attacks were getting in the way of her ability to remain in class, so she was frequently leaving class, spending time in the toilets, and it was impacting overall on her attendance, so she wasn't coming to school for many days. School noticed as well that she'd become increasingly sensitive to noise and was avoiding the lunch hall, which meant that she wasn't eating her lunch at all. So she was going all day not eating. So the increasing sensitivity to noise often can go hand in hand with someone who is extremely anxious, because essentially, as I said earlier, they're on high alert, and so then sounds can become louder in a way to them, or you become more sensitive to them. Now, given that she wasn't eating all day, inevitably she was having a lot of physical symptoms of feeling faint, feeling weak, of course. However, she was interpreting them as further kind of anxiety symptoms, and then she was getting more and more panic attacks as a result. So I agreed a plan of what we call graded exposure with the young person and with the head of year. I was only in weekly, but the head of year was able to do this plan with her over a period of 10 days, where we essentially had a plan with the young person. Initially, she would go into the lunch hall when no one was there, so just literally being in an empty lunch hall. And we had stages, I think one of the stages was walking through the lunch hall with the head of year. But anyway, there were lots of steps. And then eventually the final step was to eat lunch with her peers in the lunch hall. And she managed to get to, over a period of about 10 days of exposure, she was able to get back into the lunch hall. She started eating lunch again, and her symptoms actually went down a lot. And then I provided a few sessions, really just a bit of psychoeducation around panic. And then I was able to close the case. So I just thought that was a nice example of really close working. And I wouldn't have been able to do that graded exposure in the same way, because I was only in once a week. So it was great to have that work supported in the school. So I think, the main key message that I hope I've got across is, as much as it's important to normalize anxiety, which I think, I hope I've done to a certain extent, it's equally important to try to recognize when a young person's mental health is being significantly impacted, and to try to put some additional support in place. So when, these things aren't working, when really there's significant distresses going on for a significant amount of time and having a significant impact on the young person, then I would very much advise you to seek the advice of specialist services. So this is my last slide. I just wanted to, this is a book that I recommend to a lot of parents. It's really highly accessible, really easy read, and it's got lots of lovely ideas in it. There's also a self-help guide, which you can find on the internet. You can just Google that. And then there's the last bit is about self-care strategies that are on the On My Mind website, which is run by Anna Freud. So thank you very much. That's me finished, and I'll be back for the Q&A at the end. So I'm going to hand back to Natalie.
Thank you so much, Cyra. That was a really knowledgeable yet accessible presentation, and I think, really clearly explaining some of the practical strategies that can be used by a variety of different staff. So I found that very interesting, and I hope that the attendees found it interesting as well. And just again, as Cyra said, if you have any questions for her, please drop those into the Q&A chat box at the bottom, and we will endeavour to get through as many as we can with Cyra later when she's back. Thank you. So moving on to our second and final speaker for this afternoon. Our next speaker is Deborah Bligh. Deborah is a vice principal at St Richard's Catholic College in Bexhill-on-Sea. And as I mentioned earlier, Deb's wonderful students co-produced the animation that I played for you earlier, and they helped us to develop the script, the characters, the content of the animation, and they also provided the voiceovers that you heard. So yeah, it's been a real pleasure to work with Deb's students and teachers, and they came in last week for a very special event where they were able to meet the Princess of Wales as well. So very, very exciting for them. And yeah, we're very grateful to Deb's school for taking part in that with us. Now back to Deb's bio. So Debs has been leading on pastoral care, safeguarding and mental health and wellbeing as a senior leader of the school for 16 years. She's currently completing a level 4 qualification in senior mental health leadership in schools. The school's most recent Ofsted rated personal development and behaviour and attitudes as outstanding and highlighted the strong relationships that existed in the school. Debs is going to share some practical tips that they use at St Richard's Catholic College with you today. So I'm very delighted to hand over to you, Debs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to have the anxious moment now of also trying to share my screen. Lovely. So feeling very humbled to be asked to speak to you today. What I've been asked to do is to speak specifically about things that we do, the story of the school, I suppose, focusing on that transition and year 7 and 8 around anxiety. So, lucky enough to live and work just by the sea in Bexhill, lovely setting. Got a very broad mix of pupils from a wide variety of backgrounds, and it was just an absolute delight to have that opportunity to work with the Anna Freud Centre on the recent anxiety animation. I don't think the children have come down from the ceiling yet. They had such an exciting day up in London. We've been using the Anna Freud resources for a number of years now. I find them absolutely brilliant. And when they came in and worked with the children, what was so clear was how much they were really listened to. And when I look back on that video now, I can really see their story, and it's very much what we see on a day-to-day basis at St Richard's. One of the things that we did a number of years ago was to look at what the offer was for young people around wellbeing. And we came at it from the point of view, we used the Anna Freud resources first of all, but we came upon it from the point of view of what do we feel that every single child should have offered to them? You know, what is the universal offer? So what is it that we would give to help support all of us who are going to be anxious at different times and points in our lives? And that's very much that bottom part that you can see on that slightly unusually shaped pyramid there in front of you. And it aligns very much with the mission statement of the school, which is this sort of real hope that all children have the opportunity to live full and happy lives, and that we've got a responsibility as educators to support them in flourishing, completely being aware at times there are going to be challenges and difficulties. And we also thought that as much as we all try, we can never hand on heart say that we know every child who is, you know, currently suffering or struggling or finding things difficult, because not everyone will reveal themselves to us in school, nor do we know when anxiety might hit in the future and become overwhelming. So we come at it in the thought that if we try and give the best possible universal offer that we can to everybody, it will start to, if not equip, at least expose them to the various strategies and hopefully skills that they will need to go on and live happy and productive lives. One of the main areas of doing this, or vehicles for us, is our transition programme. That importance of connection and belonging and feeling known, especially when you're going to move up, for some of them, from a tiny little primary school into, you know, a big building with over 1,000 children. So trying to preempt those anxieties and spend time with the young people to get them prepared before they come to us is a big focus of the school. So what we do is we have very strong relationships with our feeder primary schools. We go in and watch their nativity shows. We invite them into a whole variety of things that go on at St Richard's, right from sort of the younger years, so year 5 or even younger. And then when they come and they're sort of, you know, we know that they're coming to the school, we start quite a strong transition programme. And that means that the head of year 7 now has been out every week into the main feeder primary schools, getting to know the children. Some of that is formal, so, you know, doing lessons with them around what St. Richard's is going to look like, how forms are put together, you know, what homework is going to look like, what's your online journal, how do you navigate this, how do you pack your bag the night before school. And others is just that real relationship building. So being out in the playground at the social times, or being there at the end of the school days to say hello to parents and carers, and really, you know, ensuring that the children, when they come up to us, are known. And one of the COVID keepers that we had is that we couldn't do that during those lockdown times. So we started an online programme, and we've kept that, and we've developed that further. So the head of year 7 will go in on a weekly basis and have sessions with the pupils in those feeder primary schools. But then there will be sessions that are released every week. You would sit down as a child and do with mum or dad or your carer at home. You'd fill in something and come back the next week. And the idea was, it was about really engaging the whole family in the process, really in the hope that they do feel confident when they come up to us. We have coffee mornings, we have tours in the afternoon when all the other children have gone, so it feels quieter. We have a special additional programs for our more vulnerable or young people with SEN needs. And transition isn't just about the year 6 to 7. You know, if we think about the transition that perhaps a looked after child has to go through if they're moved area, we've got quite a strong policy and process about what that will look like. Or a child that's been expelled permanently from another school that's coming into our school probably needs even more care and support than anybody else. So thinking carefully about the transition programme and reviewing it year on year, always with this emphasis on trying to allow a child to feel a sense of belonging and community and really wanted and valued. We have Wellbeing Mondays, and we have a PSHE programme, no doubt, like everybody on the call. And we also ensure that, you know, anxiety or discussions around wellbeing happen throughout the entire curriculum. We like to think of it as the daily narrative. It's a normal part of growing up. It's a normal part of, you know, life experiences. So we have our self-care. We try and keep that quite simple, just looking at 6 areas. There's some examples, hopefully, that you can see now of wellbeing plans. So children will sit down in sort of time with their tutors, and they write a wellbeing plan for the year that's sent home, and then they review that termly. What can they add? What can they change? With this whole thought that we're just gently exposing them, hopefully, to the habits that we all need to adopt to promote that positive well-being. I imagine we've all been in this situation, mostly when we're, you know, having to fly to a lesson or cover a lunch duty, or dare I say it, trying to nip to the loo, where we've come across a child that's inconsolable. So, you know, crying, it's quite difficult to try and understand what has happened, or they're feeling panicked about going into a lesson. So we requested some training for all staff from our local mental health support team. And what they gave us was a couple of just really easy but good strategies to use. So if we think about it, when a child's overwhelmed, it can be hard for them to give you the clear narrative of what's happened. So instead of trying, exactly as Cyra said, that was really resonating with me, to sort of tell them everything's going to be okay, or don't worry, or we can sort this out, what we're doing now is using one of the simple resources you can see on the screen, which is either a understanding your problem resource or a thought diary resource, and giving them a little bit of time and space to try and fill that in themselves first, and then coming back to them and being able to have a sort of a more meaningful conversation about what might be going on, and listening to them, because, you know, more often than not, they, given the time and space, will come up with the strategies and suggestions that we would want them to embrace to try and move forward. Exactly, again, as Cyra said, sometimes anxiety is going to overwhelm a young person, and they're going to need more than the tutor or the universal offer in school. A few years back, we put together a sort of menu of what support was available in the school. And we did that because when you think about it, the bravery it must take for a young person, a teenager, to go to a member of staff and to let them know that they're feeling incredibly anxious or incredibly worried is immense. And if that member of staff then says, oh, well, don't worry, I'll go and speak to Mrs. Bligh, or I'll go and find the pastoral leader, or it can just accidentally diminish their feelings. You know, they've chosen that person to speak to. So we've done quite a lot of staff training on really understanding what are the resources available in school, what does that look like, how does the referral process work, who are those main members of staff, so that those conversations early on with a child who's feeling that their anxiety is overwhelming them is a positive one, and they're able to experience validation of their emotions and feelings and know that they can go to any member of staff, the person they trust, and they're going to get some good and helpful advice. We speak a lot as teachers about the importance of deliberate practice in our teaching. It's always wanting children to try, especially at the moment, you know, exam questions or AFL, or they need to deliberately practice. So it's got to be more than lessons on well-being in your PSHE that tells you to go out and, you know, spend time in nature or take up a hobby. It's got to be about putting this in front of the children. So one of the things that we do is everyone in year 7 is part of an environmental rangers scheme. And so for 6 weeks, once a week for a couple of hours, they'll go out. We're very blessed. We live right next door, 3 minutes walk to the beach. We've got some lovely green areas, and they follow a program, and it's all about, you know, spending time in nature, team building, relationship building, friendships, learning. And it's just a lovely way to get them involved. And then all the way through the year, we try to put things on, whether it is, I just snipped this from our recent newsletter, you know, the wildlife photograph competition, or, you know, we're offering them different challenges, again, making best use of our outside areas, but being really clear that this is something that every child needs to experience when they're with us. In the same way, we put this huge emphasis on clubs and activities. We have 77 clubs going on in the school day, from before school, lunchtime, after school, all given by the incredible generosity of the amazing staff that we have at St. Richard's. And I've just snipped in Monday, what Monday's offer is. And when a child joins us in year 7, one of the big changes is homework and the increase in homework. And what we've done is we've said absolutely yes to homework, but we've reduced the homework we would expect a year 7 to do. But every single year 7 is expected to join a club. So that's got to be outside of the PE lesson. And it can't be, oh, miss, but I play football at the weekend, or I'm in a theatre group. It's got to be, this is our community, this is about our sense of belonging, and this is something that we would very much like you to join in with. So this is a homework, in a sense, that everybody in year 7 does, and it is tracked, and each term you're asked to sign up for a club, and it's a way in which you can hopefully enjoy but also learn those skills and maybe have that lifelong hobby as you go into adulthood. I know therapy dogs are the big thing. We don't have one, but I would trump them with grandparents, because I think that grandparents play the most incredible role in children's lives and are very important to them. And there are many children that do not have grandparents. So we have some schemes going on at school. We have, first of all, our grandparents' mass. So our grandparents all come in their hundreds at the start of the year, and they have a mass with us. We're a Catholic school, and then there's refreshments and tours of the school. But we also go out. We've got a great link with a residential home that's visited. You've got some pictures up there which were taken just last week, and that was visiting one of the local church groups. I just think that exposure, that amazing leveling that the elderly population, or older population I should say, can bring to young people. And the children always come back and talk about how much they valued being able to speak. And I know that they've enjoyed it as well from the other end. And also, we're sort of listening to Cyra about the things that are going on in the world that causes anxiety, and owning them and giving children the opportunity to join in with peaceful protests or making their stand or doing something about it. We've got a scheme in school called The Crest, which is a way of celebrating all that occurs outside of, I suppose, that traditional academia. And hopefully you can see on the screen that that is really about giving young people those opportunities to, you know, get involved. Volunteering is so important, isn't it? You know, having those activities and being exposed as widely as you possibly can to a whole variety of things that can support your well-being. When a child feels that their voices are heard, it can really earth anxiety. So we try to provide as many opportunities as we can to voice concerns, and that they feel that they're in a safe space to tell us how they're feeling or what things in the school needs to be improved. In the same way, when we think about, you know, the teenagers and the importance of providing safe spaces, particularly around identity or particularly around the things that can seem very concerning in the world. So I remember after Ofsted released their report on sexual harassment in schools, you know, the children, you know, it was everywhere. It was all over everywhere. It turned on the news, on social media, and it raised anxiety, absolutely, of the possibility of it happening. So we said, well, let's get a focus group together. Who wants to join? Tell us what you think. What do you feel about all of this? And you know, they came up with some amazing things. So they didn't massively identify it happening in school, but they identified the worry about it possibly happening. They also came up with an idea of an anonymous reporting tool, which we use, which is the Whisper app, which I would massively recommend having a look at. It's been fantastic. I've been in awe of the young people who have raised anonymous worries about friends. They'll say something like, I noticed so-and-so was looking very down. I'm not a good friend of theirs, but I'm hoping someone can check in with them. Or, you know, my friend, we had a recent one, my friend self-harming, they've made me promise not to tell anyone, but, you know I must, but I want to raise this anonymously. Could you find a way, perhaps in PE, of seeing this without them knowing? So that's been absolutely brilliant. The Race Equalities Group, and again, brilliant resources from the Andrew Freud Centre there that we've used. They came up with some wonderful, wonderful ideas. They asked us to stop punishing so hard when we heard hate language and actually move into some education. So they did some really great resources about the history of slur words. They've been involved in talking to young people who've perhaps used hate language, and they developed a really good booklet that a young person does afterwards. And these things have really seen reductions in the school. So, you know, their voice has power, and I think that's so important. When we came back from lockdown, from the pandemic, we started to all be together again. One of the loudest things the children were saying was the amount and the increase of online hate that they were seeing in social media, not necessarily children to children in the school, but just that bombardment of anger. And I think we all remember that as educators, how angry young people were feeling, or how angry the world was feeling, and how it was negatively affecting them. So we spent a long time talking about that. So we worked with other schools, we led a project, we worked with the local police and Safer Schools Sussex and various mental health charities that are local to us. And one of the things that the children did is that they wrote amazing pledges, and they continue to this yearly, amazing pledges that got put up in big colourful posters all around our school as that reminder that we're all feeling anxious sometimes, you know, about the way we look, you know, how many friends we have, what exam pressure is coming up, what does the future hold. So that real peer support has been wonderful at St Richard's. And I'm aware I've only got 5 minutes, so I'll try to move a little faster. We have got a fabulous group of young people who are our wellbeing ambassadors, and some of them had the fortune of working on the Anna Freud recent anxiety video. So they wear lanyards. We've all got, I think I've got my one on today. We all wear the B or the mental health first aid staff wear the B in the school, but also all of the young people wear the B as well. It's like our symbol: be kind, be friends, you know, be the one, the person that's going to be there for others. And they really are active. We've got a lovely peace garden where, you know, young people can go and speak to student listeners or peer supporters. Then we've got a lovely beehive where they can go at break or lunch times if they want to do so. We try and unite as much as we possibly can with young people. So there's some images that we have got recently. We were looking last week around anxiety and getting staff to just put on their doors just a really simple little, you know, speech bubble. What do you do when you're feeling anxious, or how do you promote your well-being? You can see we start school on a Friday if you want to, with a bit of hula hooping, and the staff get involved, or knit and nature, where you try and really attempt to do a do with rather than a done to. We do have a number of safe spaces around the school where young people can come. I do apologise. So we have a wellbeing hub that we call the Hive. We have also got a chapel. We're very lucky to be able to have a chapel, and that gives us you know, a lovely space for young people to go. We have our garden. We've got a wellbeing walk that we're trialing. Quite often I've seen exit cards used quite poorly in school, where lots of young people are carrying an exit card from class. I think, you know, the loss of learning is something that was, and so we do, instead of stepping out of the class or going to a designated person, there will be, you can step out for a couple of minutes and try one of the ground acting class. We don't have wandering around the corridors. We don't have children out of classes. It's really clear that there is a sort of a break, a lunchtime before and after school space for you to access help. Around the school, we've got little, you know, boxes where you can just grab a well-being idea, or if you need a new sort of plan to work on. So just try and make it as normalised as possible around the school. So finally, just to say that we are a very friendly school. We would be delighted if anybody ever wanted to come visit and talk to the pupils, or hear about what we're doing on wellbeing. Specifically today, I've talked about anxiety, but we do have a much wider, bigger programme that we look to for supporting wellbeing as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah. That was amazing. Provided some really helpful tips that I think all schools can take in, you know, in some way, shape or form. Lots to kind of take away there. I would love to introduce both of you back now, Cyra and Debs. We've got lots of questions that have been coming through from attendees who have both found your presentations extremely enlightening, but would like to know more. So if you could both come back, and I will kick off with a couple of questions for you. So my first question, I'm going to pose this to Cyra to begin with. So we had a couple of questions about the age range of anxiety and kind of how that presents, and possibly if it presents differently. So, I mean, firstly, is anxiety a significant issue in primary schools as well as in secondary schools to start with?
Yes, I would say in a word. No, you definitely see anxiety presentations in younger children and older children. I wouldn't say it's necessarily more actually in older, whereas something like depression, you would see more in the older age range than the younger. However, anxiety does present across the board, really. However, it might present slightly differently, as you can imagine. The younger children, especially the very little ones, might present more with something like separation anxiety would be a classic thing for the younger ones to present with. So struggling separating from a parent or carer. That would be quite a common one. Also, I guess the way that it shows itself in the younger ones, again, might be slightly different. So what we tend to see more of is and understandably, because the child can't maybe articulate as well how they're feeling, they might say they have tummy ache, they feel sick, that kind of thing might clue you into anxiety. The way that you might approach it, was that part of the question, or did I just?
Yeah, no, there was another question kind of just touching on what you just said about if there are strategies that you'd recommend for children that maybe can't articulate that anxiety because they're too young.
Yeah, I guess we would be less needing the younger ones to articulate, because that would be very difficult. I mean, if it was a separation anxiety thing, you might need to involve the parent, of course, in the work, because it's about separating from the parent and how they might separate from them in a more in a supportive way. And but the younger ones, yes, we can't expect them always to kind of explore their anxieties or be able to kind of talk to them, but we can, some of these techniques again would still be relevant for the younger ones, especially like they do lovely breathing techniques with younger children, where they put a teddy bear on they get them to lie down, they put the teddy bear on their tummy, and the teddy bear goes up, and there's lots of, you can look them up, but there's lots of different ways that you might do it with a younger child. Also, I like the idea of, I think some primary schools, and you guys are much better at telling me this, but I think they use worry boxes and things like that for the younger ones, because again, they might find it hard to speak up, but they might write something down that they're worried about, put it in the worry box, and then the teacher might talk them through. But I think, still doing some really gentle psychoeducation on anxiety is still really, really helpful for the younger children. It's just the way that, you're not going to go into cortisol and adrenaline with them. And again, teachers are much better at this than I am, how you might adapt that, but you can still definitely normalize anxiety. We all feel, and that butterflies in the tummy kind of thing with the younger children. So I think there's lots of lovely things you can do with young children to normalize anxiety, but also talk about what you might do if you're feeling really worried.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cyra. I'm going to ask Debs a question. So we had a few comments coming in around the sort of time that it can take to kind of go through some of these amazing initiatives that you mentioned, and people were sort of wondering, are your head of year also teaching staff, or are they non-teaching? That was one of the questions. And also just generally in terms of your journey, because you've done so much, you do so much with all your pupils. Is this something that's taken like a very long time to get to where you are now? So yeah, two things, kind of the teaching side and the aspect of teaching time, and then also just generally your school and getting to where you are now.
Thank you. So yes, it absolutely has taken a long time to get to where we are now, mostly done by, as we all do, making a lot of mistakes on the way and reviewing things and listening to professionals and learning and stealing lots of things on the internet, which there is. No, our heads of year are teachers, and they do carry a sort of quite a large teaching load. They do always have a couple of sessions available in the day. Alongside them, we've got a pastoral manager who doesn't teach at all, and 2 pastoral support workers who don't teach at all. But we've always been quite clear, and we've got much clearer about when a young person is there to access help. So we've got a huge amount. I think we've got over 30 staff trained now as mental health first aiders. We would hope, and hand on heart, I would say that all of the staff buy into it. They buy into wellbeing. They buy into this sort of hashtag, make it the daily narrative, make it the daily talk, work around it. And what we've tried to do is foster a school that's really calm, that's focused on learning, that's really clear about prioritising a young person's learning as alongside their well-being, but being really clear as to when you can access that. And I know that's really hard. I know that's really, really hard. And we've had to work really, really hard on doing that, on stopping those kind of wanting to be out of class, or I need to be in the library, or a little bit like Cyra was giving that brilliant case study about the exposure and how we work there. So I would say now the culture is in place, but yes, it was definitely a long journey.
Thank you. Yeah, it just shows, it's shining through your presentation, the kind of amount of enthusiasm and dedication that it obviously has taken from staff at your school. So yeah, well done. I'm going to go back to Cyra again, and there were a few questions around neurodivergent children and their presentation. First question is there a direct link between anxiety and ASD? The first question. And then there was a couple of other questions around kind of differentiating between the symptoms of anxiety and then symptoms of ADD or ADHD, because they can be quite similar.
Okay. So anxiety comes under the umbrella of it. So some children who have a diagnosis of ASD do present with high levels of anxiety. So I think the research shows that, I wrote it, research shows that autistic people are more prone to experience anxiety, and estimates that up to half of all autistic young people will experience higher levels of anxiety on a regular basis. So not all, but yes, it can be more common for young people with autism to experience high levels of anxiety. Now, how we understand that is really important, because young people with autism, it tends to be related to social situations and their sensory difficulties. Now, some of what I've talked about is relevant. Of course, some of these techniques could be used with that population. However, we just need to give extra consideration to understanding what's going on for that young person, because at the end of the day, the world is an incredibly stressful and anxiety-provoking world for them to live in. So I think we have to be a bit individual in our approach. We have to be careful. We don't want to push those young people too much. It's about kind of taking an individualized approach to, if they're struggling in certain environments, what is that due to their sensory difficulties? Is it something, are they anxious because of their sensory difficulties, or are they anxious for other reasons? So we'd have to understand that. We'd need to tease it apart. So some of these strategies would work. However, a more individualized approach and being realistic about what that young person can tolerate would be really important, I think.
Thank you, Cyra. That's really helpful.
And then the other question was how it's different from ADHD.
Yeah, how do you differentiate between symptoms of anxiety and ADHD? They can obviously present quite similarly.
So the only similarity, they're quite different, but maybe I confused it by saying the word ADHD in my presentation, but basically what I was saying is that some anxious children can look quite fidgety and can struggle with attention and concentration, and that certainly doesn't mean that they fit the ADHD category, because that's quite different. So ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It's kind of more about impulsivity. It's about hyperactivity. So we need to, again, look at the whole picture. Are they presenting with hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention? In which case, okay, we might be thinking it's more ADHD. Whereas anxiety would look quite different to that. Anxiety would, again, it is difficult to, but that's where you would want to explore that with the young person. Are they worried about, are they constantly worried about things? Was there a specific trigger? What are the other symptoms, to really build up a picture of whether it's anxiety or ADHD? But I hope that.
That's really helpful. Thank you. There was one more question I wanted to ask, and then I'll pick a question for Debs. It's about the physical symptoms. So if, for example, a student is frequently visiting the toilet, or it's manifesting in another way that's more physical, how might staff be able to manage those sorts of symptoms?
So we have, so I did have a young person who was, yes, we do sometimes see anxious young people needing the toilet more. However, a lot of their anxiety is actually about not being allowed to go to the toilet. So sometimes what we find is actually, if you allow them, within reason, to go to the toilet, their anxiety drops, and then they're not going to need to go as much. So it's kind of, again, I know it's hard, it's just exploring what that anxiety is. And what you often find is it's a fear that they won't be allowed to go, and then what will happen, and then they'll wet themselves, and then the whole, and then everyone will see, and then I'll be embarrassed, and this anxiety is like spiraling. And actually just allowing them to, I had it with a young person, and basically the staff were told to allow them to go to the toilet maybe once in a lesson. They started, and just knowing that they were allowed to go, the anxiety goes down, the symptoms are less, they need to go less. They might initially use it, but actually what we found is they didn't need it that much after that. What you also might want to do is, again, giving them some psychoeducation about what's going on for them. So that is a symptom of anxiety, and what's happening is that it's spiraling, and it's kind of they're panicking that they can't, what's going to happen if they don't go, and then they need to go more, if that makes sense. So I would probably recommend, along, obviously schools need to make their own choices, but I would recommend allowing the young person to go. Maybe Debs can step in. I would recommend that they allow that young person to go to the toilet, so that fear is removed, and then they realize actually that they don't need to go as much as they thought they did.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I'm going to come back to Debs. And we had a lot of questions about the physical space. So you spoke quite a lot about the different physical spaces that you have for your pupils. You mentioned the hive and the chapel. So one of the questions was, are there suggestions of how schools can develop and improve their physical environments to support with creating spaces that are anxiety reducing?
Thanks, Natalie. I also thought when I finished that question that I hadn't give the full answer, so I'm just going to give the full answer to the first one. What I should have said is that we do use, we're all thinking carefully about our budgets, but what we do have is we have a full-time, well, not full-time, but 3 days a week counsellor. We have an occupational therapist. We work with the mental health support team in East Sussex. They're absolutely brilliant. And we do have a full-time lay chaplain. So if anyone's there thinking, gosh, how is it all happening? We are quite blessed in that. And one of the things we try and do is employ our own people as the counsellor, as the OT, because then our young people who are already highly anxious, that's why they're going, are seeing the same person. And that person becomes very much part of the staff of St. Richard's rather than a brought in. I just wanted to share that because I suddenly thought I might have not, perhaps. So our beehive little hub was literally the most awful, I don't know what you would call it. It was one of the music practice rooms that was tagged on the outside of the PE corridor. And when I first sort of muted it as this could be the space, everyone just thought, are you crazy? It's just, it's too noisy. It's who's going to go there. It's out of nowhere. It's just a dumping room. So we literally did just clear out what probably was just a really large storage cupboard, but we got it soundproofed. We went for bids to get money so we could have it all resourced, that it became a really nice space. In the same way, we managed to secure a bid last year to get for our outdoor space, it was just the field, but to get gym equipment, the type that you might see in parks. So we managed to secure that. So it's always about going out and begging and borrowing and sometimes having to steal things to try and make it. Our school is massively oversubscribed, and the corridors at times are, they're so full and they're so busy. So if PE isn't on, there isn't a spare classroom in the school. So we had to get really creative. We've got an outdoor gazebo, and we made a little garden out of one of the sort of banks in the school. So sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have a modern school. Our building's quite old. Sometimes it's just about having to be really, really creative with what you've got. And if you get the children decorating and bringing, their ideas to it, you can make it okay.
Thank you, Debs. That's really helpful. And there was another question about the Environmental Rangers programme and whether you'd mind sharing that.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to share anything. So we used to do a different sort of programme, but then we decided to write it and develop it in-house. And it's absolutely brilliant. My daughter's in year 8 now, but in year 7, she would have said that was the best thing that they did. And just, absolutely more than happy to share. Plus, because we've been sort of working on it for lots of years, we do have lots of wellbeing packs and resources and booklets. If anyone's interested, it's no problems at all. I've definitely found it from somewhere else.
Thank you, Debs. That was brilliant. What we'll do is afterwards we'll share any links or any resources that you recommend. We can share those with the attendees. So thank you for that. It's really generous. Another question that came in, I'm just having a look. I think there was a couple of questions around EBSA, so emotionally based school avoidance, and people sort of noticing an increase in that since COVID. There's a couple of questions around kind of why you think this might be, for example, is it because of COVID? Is it because children are used to seeing parents working from home? And then any sort of advice around resources or strategies on that. I'll go to Cyra first.
Yeah, there's no doubt that COVID and lockdown and all of that had a massive impact. You know, all of the incredibly anxious children had this experience of not having to go into school and being at home and feeling better and not having to be exposed to this world that they found very difficult. You know, it was interesting, some of the cases we were trying to offer some online support, and actually some of the cases, very active cases that we were working with in school, when it came to lockdown and we were checking in, they're like, no, I'm doing fine now, thanks. You know, everything's all right at the moment. I'm at home. You know, so it's really interesting. You know, you take them out of that environment and their anxiety goes down, of course. So there is no doubt that, yeah, that's had a massive impact, and it's been very difficult for a lot of them to go back into school. And, you know, also there are unfortunately some schools that have been set up that are entirely online, which gives them another option, which, you know, I think maybe works for some children. So yeah, so in terms of emotionally based, it's a really big topic, and I know a topic that I think that, you know, we would have to do a whole nother talk on. But it's about looking at understanding what that young person needs, what support they need to come back into school, to get them out of the house. Yeah, that key adult in school that they can check in with. You know, I've got a child at the moment who only comes in once a week to see me. You know, that's the amount that they can manage at the moment, but we are obviously actively working with school to build that up over time. But I think it's about mental health professionals and schools and parents and children all working together for the same aim of trying to get that child back into school, but equally understanding the barriers that child might be facing, and, you know, and at sometimes questioning, is this the right environment for them as well? We can't always assume that it is, and that they can tolerate that. You know, should this young person be in a specialist provision, for example? So lots to think about there.
Yeah, it is a huge and complex topic, and I know we had a webinar on the topic a few months back, but I'm sure it's something we're going to circle back to, and I know at Anna Freud we're doing a lot of work on it at the moment, so hopefully we'll have more to share in the coming few weeks and months. But Debs, I don't know if you had anything to add on school avoidance and how, yeah, if you're seeing an increase in that in your school and how you might have managed that.
I think there is definitely an increase across the whole country. I was meeting with deputies from the area group I work in, and they were definitely highlighting that as well. I've got anecdotal evidence of successes, but I think each child is very individual. You know, there are some, not very many, but a couple of children that are still wearing masks in the school environment, and that's absolutely fine. You know, if that's what you need to be able to come into school. We had delivered a workshop a little while back for the mental health support team for East Sussex about a young person. We were the 4th secondary school, and she'd only clocked 3% attendance, and for her, which has been a massive success because she's over the 95 now, it was about establishing the need for friendship and security and really understanding what was holding her back. And the team around the child there were the amazing children in the school. You know, sometimes you've got to look and try and find it out, but 100% anxiety has grown since the pandemic. And there is, you know, Sussex has just released one as well around emotional avoidance for schools. I think there's a lot more that we need to learn about this one.
Absolutely. Thank you both. I'm going to probably do a couple more questions before we close for this evening. So I think first question, so there was 2 terms that you mentioned in your presentation, Cyra. So the first one was metacognition. Someone asked, could you explain a bit about what metacognition means? And then the second one was a bit more about self-compassion and that strategy.
So it's just sorry, silly, unnecessary word for higher level thinking. It's not, yeah, just kind of that more so the frontal part of the brain is involved in the higher level thinking. So when we're talking about kind of analyzing and kind of thinking things through and thinking about the consequences and planning and all of that stuff. I think that's when I used the word. I don't know. I can't remember when I used it now.
Yeah, I think there was a slide and there were some bullet points about like different topics. I think that was one of them. But yeah, that's helpful. And then a bit more about self-compassion and that strategy.
So just an approach that I guess I really like is, we get so used to talking to ourselves in quite a harsh and critical way, and almost like I speak with young people about some of the ways that they speak to themselves, and then I say, okay, if your friend came to you, would you say any of that to them? Oh, no, I'd never say that. I would be much kinder, and I'd be much more careful in the way that I spoke to them, and that would hurt their feelings. And, and it's just trying to get the young person to be equally kind and compassionate to themselves. Because actually that critical voice can be incredibly detrimental to a young person's mental health. Their self-esteem, their confidence, to constantly have that kind of negative voice. So we don't want to go from that extreme to being like, oh, you're great, you're wonderful. But, there could be like a happy medium where we just learn to, and it is something that doesn't come naturally to everyone. So it is something that needs to be almost kind of practiced and rehearsed, and, to have certain phrases that you might say to yourself to just try to explore this idea of just being a bit kinder to self, more compassionate to yourself, like you would be to others. And also the idea is, okay, if you wanted to get the best out of someone, if you wanted to, teachers, when you want to get the best out of someone, do we shout and criticize them? No, we encourage them. We use gentle kind of words of support and praise, that we know that gets a better outcome. So again, why would you speak to yourself in that way? So trying to help young people to identify that critical voice and just shift it slightly so that they're speaking to themselves in a kinder way.
Thank you. That's a really clear and helpful explanation. So I think final question is around engagement with parents and carers, and how you might do that in your school, and how that sort of supports all of the work that you're already doing with the pupils around mental health and wellbeing. So yeah, question for Debs. Do you involve parents in some of the kind of good practice and tips that you've mentioned today, and how do you do that?
So lots of different ways. So first of all, it's through the transition. So the whole idea is get a relationship going. So one of the things we do is we go out to the feeder primary schools. We offer a big geographical area. So we'll go into the Hastings, St Leonard's, Eastbourne and Bexhill, and we set up what we call road shows. And that's going into the feeder primary schools, but inviting other local schools, so that the first meeting that we have with the parents and the children is in their environment. And there's presentations, it's in the evenings, we give various presentations about the academic and then the pastoral support on offer. And then we stay around for about, half an hour, 40 minutes, have a cup of tea and just sit and talk. And that's like your first way of trying to form a relationship. And then from then on, we just try and get as many opportunities to have parents in and carers in as we possibly can, but particularly focused. We have 2 parent focus groups. They meet once a term, once in the morning and then once in the evening, and we're continuously canvassing them on their ideas and their thoughts and sharing what we're doing. So last week's one, of course, we had the glory of showing the animation, but also we wanted to show, we were looking at a new wellbeing trial. What was that, that trail around the school? What's their ideas around that? What do they think? This is a new problem solving. How would the children engage in it? In addition, we do evenings in the school. So around exam time, we'll have all the parents in, how we can support the young people in revision, but also how we can support their well-being and health throughout the exam period. And then there's like a sort of variety of different, evenings that go on throughout the year, sort of you name it, whether that's around the work that we do around relationships or substances, or, you know, or also a lot around kind of understanding the science of the teenage brain, because that's hard for all of us out there, teachers and parents alike. So constantly canvassing and sending out questionnaires, just simple ones, getting the ideas back. But they're really, really helpful, our parent focus group. So they might be small in numbers, but they do bring, because everyone's on a WhatsApp chat, aren't they? They do bring the ideas from the other parents in.
Brilliant, thank you. And Cyra, finally, any final thoughts on engagement with parents and carers?
Sorry. I mean, it's always helpful to work with the systems around the child. If you make little changes, I mean, in my work as well, you know, working with a child in isolation, you're never going to get as much change as you are if you bring in the parent and you involve them in your work. And you know, with the younger children, actually, you know, if you're seeing a therapist, the treatment of choice is to go through the parents. So not to work directly with the young children, but actually to work with the parents, because they are the biggest source of influence in the child's world. And as they get older, of course, they want their own space. However, the importance of you know, involving them, you know, I've involved parents in lots of this anxiety work, getting them to do some of the work at home with the young person as well. But also kind of drawing the parent's attention to what's going on. So if you see stuff in school, bringing the parent in and exploring it with them, so that they have a sense, so that, to help them understand it, I guess, as well, and they'll give a different perspective. And again, similar to what I said earlier, is in order to work most effectively with the child, we work with the systems around the child, so not just the child on their own. So we work with school, we work with parent, we work with, you know, in order to make the best kind of change for the young person. So yeah, always as much as possible to involve parents and carers. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's probably all we have time for this evening, but thank you so much to Cyra and Deborah. We've really enjoyed having you, and I know the attendees have really enjoyed it as well, so we've had some really positive, lovely feedback. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And to everyone who's attended, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will follow up with you with slides and with any links and resources from Debs and Cyra. And please expect slides and things within about 10 days. If you'd like information to be sent to you about any of our upcoming seminars, please do sign up to the Schools in My Network, where you'll hear about it first. And also at the end of this seminar, you're going to be redirected to a feedback form, and we'd be really grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete this form. So thank you all. Thank you very much for attending tonight, and I hope to see you all at the next seminar. Thanks again, Deborah and Cyra, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Take care.